This is Caravan to Midnight, the John B. Wells program. Here is John B.
Certain frequencies more than others.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome back to Caravan to Midnight Dr. Jonathan V. Wright, a Harvard University and University of Michigan Medical School graduate. You know, he was also awarded an honorary ND by Bastyr University. He is a pioneer in research and application of natural treatments for health problems not requiring surgery. Called the father of bioidentical hormones, in the early 1980s, Dr. Wright was the first to prescribe comprehensive hormone replacement therapies using natural hormone preparations rather than hormones synthesized from pregnant horses. This therapy, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, or BHRT, is now used nationwide by millions. Other accomplishments include originating a natural treatment for childhood asthma, a natural treatment to benefit the majority of individuals with dry macular degeneration, pioneering the use of aldosterone. Is that right? Aldosterone to reverse age-related hearing loss, discovering how iodine affects estrogen metabolism and how cobalt affects steroid detoxification, and popularizing the use of the natural sugar D-mannose for urinary tract infections. He also originated an effective natural treatment for seborrheic, I'm going to get some clarifications, dermatitis, allergic and viral conjunctivitis, Osgood-Schlatter's disease, and resurrected forgotten research on human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, to treat severe neurological problems. Now that's interesting. Dr. Wright founded Tahoma Clinic in Washington State in 1973. He continues to practice medicine and serve as medical director for 3 health clinics and his laboratory. The infamous 1992 FDA armed raid on Tahoma Clinic, the great B vitamin bust, inadvertently popularized the clinic and natural medicine, with Dr. Wright's ensuing struggles and eventually acquittal, serving as major impetus for congressional reform of vitamin mineral regulation. He has authored or co-authored 14 books with 2 texts, achieving best-selling status. Since 1983, he has educated thousands of physicians in his approach. Wow, what a mouthful. Good to have you back, Doctor.
Well, thank you for having me back again, John. Appreciate it.
Well, I realize I messed up probably on a spectacular level some of these particularly the one before dermatitis, seborrheic. That's it.
Seborrheic. John, do you know why doctors and lawyers use so many big unpronounceable words?
I've noticed it seems to be a trend in the higher professions.
But do you know why?
To confuse the public.
No, so we can charge more.
Oh, gotcha.
There you go.
Well, it's been about a year since we spoke. What, may I just ask, what's new?
What's new? Quite a lot of things, some of which will be coming up in the second hour. Let's see. Is there any one really good brand new one? Yes. I'll mention that right now, and then we can talk about it a little more later on. And that is that researchers from Harvard, no less, and, you know, one must bow down there.
Absolutely.
And researchers from a Chinese university published in April of this year something entitled Ultraviolet Blood Irradiation, the Cure That Time Forgot. So here we are, the cure that time forgot. It's what you say very frequently, John. It's an old thing. That funny thing, they actually went back and read the research, and it's become new. The very important point about it is that so many bacteria and other microorganisms are becoming resistant to antibiotics. And the ultraviolet blood irradiation was known back in the 30s and 40s and early 50s to kill them.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, but it just all went away, and we can discuss why it went away when we get to that later. But now it's back, and it's really can be helpful to many people with serious infections.
Hey, here's one out of left field, Doctor. What advancements have been made, or have you involved yourself in any kind of Parkinson's mitigation, early onset Parkinson's?
The biggest advancement there is still a maybe. It comes from Italy, a Professor Constantini and his team found that injections of a vitamin, vitamin B1, thiamine, 100 to 200 milligrams twice weekly, in their research, really helped slow down Parkinson's and in some cases partially reversed some of the symptoms. So those who have Parkinson's who don't know about that can look online in good old PubMed, which is the National Library of Medicine, and put in the name Constantini and Parkinson's, and up will come several pieces of research. Now, that has been done only by Constantini and his group, but they repeated it several times. It's helped some of the people we've tried it for here at Tahoma Clinic, but I'd say it's still a maybe, but it's nice about one thing, John. It's harmless. You can't do yourself any harm trying it.
That's refreshing. That is I'm just reminded, and we've touched on this before, of these various medications that are prescribed. They're very expensive. They have their name brands, and then there's just all these, like a minute and a half of disclaimer. It's a little bit worrying. You'll get rid of this symptom, but you may develop these other symptoms, including strange or unusual dreams and tendencies towards suicide and all this stuff. I'm just like, I don't know. This is sort of like a reodorant. It sort of outstinks the stink or something.
That can't be helped, John, when you're dealing with only patent medicines, because you can't patent it if it's natural. You just can't.
Yeah.
And if it's an unnatural molecule and we put it into a body which really was not designed, created, whatever, to accept that molecule, it's going to cause problems. And so every patent medicine has its bad effects. I'm not saying natural medicine doesn't have bad effects, but most of it does not.
Now, this bioidentical hormone replacement, who
Yes,
are
sir.
candidates for this sort of treatment? And then we'll go back to its origins.
Okay. Particularly women during and after menopause. Particularly women during and after menopause. And I know I repeated myself, but that's so important to repeat. I'll tell you why later. And then men, as our testosterone and other hormone levels start to drop, which certainly is later on than women's age at menopause. But unfortunately, there's proof out there that it's now starting a decade earlier than it did in the 1940s and 1950s, when they were able to test testosterone just as well as we do now. And it seems that with all of the environmental pollution, men's testosterone levels are dropping much sooner than they did before.
And this goes way back. In your notes here, BHRT used in China from 1050 AD until the 1800s, as described in Professor Joseph Needham's book, Science and Civilization in China. Now, how in the world could they nail that down in 1050 AD?
Yeah, isn't that remarkable? And so when you kindly said, I'm the, quote, father of bioidentical hormones, unquote, well, I'm the father of the revival. That's about it. But originated, just as you said, in 1050 AD in China. Now, you see, they didn't have to know about hormones. They just had to be smart. And one of the things I keep saying is our ancestors had just about the same IQ points we do now as a collective. So no smarter, no dumber. And they observed the amazing fact, John, the young people are more vital than older people. Imagine that. So they thought that perhaps there would be some components in those younger people's bodies that might be usefully transferred to older people's bodies. Getting back to what's new, just parenthetical for a moment, Harvard University researchers, as well as other university researchers, UCSF and so forth, Stanford, did blood serum. Now, that's not the red blood cells. It's just the clear part of blood. Did blood serum transfusions from young mice to old mice. And guess what? The old mice started behaving like younger mice. And funny thing, when they biopsied the mouse brains, they found that the previously old-looking mouse brains were now looking like younger mouse brains. So that was the idea of transferring something from somebody younger to somebody older. Well, you can have that idea in 1050 AD too, can't you? Even if you don't have syringes and needles to transfer that way. So what'd they do? Well, tiny bit gross, but then again, so was hormone replacement therapy with horse urine. What they did was to build restrooms for all the young ladies over here and all the young men over there with shallow troughs. And all the young ladies were told, the young lady, what's a young lady and a young man, between 18 and 25 roughly, to troughs urinate over there until the troughs filled up. And all the young men went over there and urinated over there until the troughs filled up. Okay, and then when the troughs filled up, they let it evaporate. And probably you wouldn't want to be downwind of that. Once it evaporated, then what you might call them equivalent of interns, who always get to do the dirty work, took gums and resins and put them in little balls and rolled them through the residue in the bottom of the troughs. This is all described in Joseph Needham's book. And by the way, he had a very important partner. Her name was Guanyin Wu. She translated everything from the Chinese to him because he was from the UK. All right, so back to what they did with those little balls. Well, they took the ones from the women's restroom, the young ladies' restroom, gave them to the Empress and her buddies. And they took the ones from the men's and gave them to the Emperor and his buddies. And guess what? They all felt better. And when those records are carefully checked, it turns out that every hormone in the human body is excreted in the urine. Yeah. And so they were just transferring hormones. They didn't know what they were transferring. Now, again, for those who say, ick, that's icky. Excuse me, how many million women swallowed horse urine, estrogen, for how many years until it went out of style because of a misinterpreted study? And they did that in 1050, John. And there are hormones that are only being discovered in this last decade from urine and blood that we didn't know existed. So actually they were doing a better job because they were using every hormone found in the human body and moving it from young people to old people. Having said that, John, can you think of how a school district could finance their whole operation with no taxes?
Yeah, how about that?
Just replumb the whole high school and put in all the filters and stuff to get the pot and the speed and all that kind of stuff out of the urine.
Yeah.
And they can make a mint just selling it for hormone replacement. Seriously.
It's, of course, you weren't there, so you don't, you can't know because you weren't observing it yourself, but
right.
How do you surmise they were able to even identify hormones per se?
Well, they didn't. They just said everything that's in a young person is in the urine.
Oh, gotcha. Really?
Yeah.
Well, some of these people have cured themselves over the years of profound throat problems by drinking their own urine. What's up with that?
There are case studies about that, and nobody knows what it is in there that does it, but there's case studies. Now, there's no controlled research, but then again, there wasn't any controlled research in China in 1050 either, and they did a good job. And when actually that process was duplicated later and looked at, quote, scientifically, unquote, they found, sure enough, there's the sex steroids, which are natural to the body. I'm not talking about steroids that are artificial, are right there in the dried urine.
Which, by the way, is eroding an old church. I just saw a report on that, so I wish people would contain that stuff. It's valuable, and it will erode buildings if a sufficient amount is applied to it. Cripps Pharmacy, Vancouver, Canada.
Yes, sir.
So BHRT, comprehensive bioidentical hormone replacement, started at your clinic, Tahoma Clinic.
Yes, sir. In our century, remember, it really started in China.
Yeah. Well, where did refresh our memories here? Cripps Pharmacy.
Well, Cripps was the place that was able to source all the materials that I wanted to prescribe.
Oh, gotcha.
I asked American compounding pharmacies, and remember, this is early 1980s, and there weren't very many of them. I asked them to find not only estradiol, which was available, it's one type of estrogen, but just as importantly, estriol, which is an anti-carcinogenic estrogen, and I wanted to make sure this was safe, so that had to be in there. They couldn't find it in the States. There's also DHEA, testosterone, and other components that go into a comprehensive bioidentical hormone picture that Cripps was uniquely able to find. But they're not really the ones who started it, nor was I, John. It was a woman who came in to see me, and she had a bunch of the typical symptoms of after menopause. Menstrual bleeding had stopped, but she was still having hot flashes and night sweats and so on and so on. And she said, I'm here to see you because you do natural medicine, so please write me a prescription for something to do about this. So I started to write a prescription. She must have been a school teacher because she can read upside down. And she said, hey, isn't that a prescription for Premarin? And I said, yeah. And she looked at me and she says, do I look like a horse? Now, John, you and I have been around long enough to know never to answer a question like that from a woman, correct?
I would think not, yeah.
I avoided the question and pointed out, well, this was natural. She says, no, no, no. I want all the hormones that were in me when I was 33. I said, well, those are not on the market. They're not available. And then she did something that a lot of married guys have heard from their wives. She said, well, I'm sure you can do something about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll be back in 3 or 4 months. Meantime, I've got these other issues. So we talked about the other issues. And so that set me on a search through pharmacies to look for, because it was right in the textbooks, what hormones are in younger people. So that I didn't have to do a whole lot of searching for. But I had to search for a compounding pharmacy that could put it all together, and Cripps did that. So I had the invaluable aid there, or we wouldn't have gotten it done, John.
Well, have there been, here's another one out of left field. Any more imperial entanglements over the research that you're doing, or any of the therapies you're recommending or executing after the big vitamin raid from back in the old days?
There are persistent investigations by the state medical board, which goes under another name, but they're the state medical board, and they come and go, but nothing about bioidentical hormones, John.
Well, the net is just awash in information about BHR, bioidentical hormone replacement, and books here, ageless. Here's another one. Both 2 out of 3 have women on them. One of them has 2 syringes.
Okay. Well, I have a book out too. It came out in 2010, written with Dr. Lane Leonard, Leonard. It was titled by the publisher. Now, please forgive us for that. We had a different name, but they titled it Stay Young and Sexy with Bioidentical Hormones. And we got them to add to that the science explained, because it is very, very science-based. There's a lot of research now. Folks who say there's no research into it are welcome to subscribe to a website that has 4,400 or more research papers on bioidentical hormones. If they want to read them, it's $99 a year. Download them and read them all. So the science is there. However, a lot of what's going on with bioidentical hormones is unfortunately misuse rather than appropriate safe use. But before we cover that, could we get to why we should be considering bioidentical hormones?
Let's do. You just take us wherever we want. I consider myself to be in class
you're
right now.
very gracious with all your guests that way. Thank you so much.
Well, seriously, I consider myself to be in class right now. There's no way that I can probe the mind of a doctor who's been doing this for decades. I can probe it a little bit, but it's like I can't just reach in there and pull out a question. So wait a second. Should everyone be interested in this?
You bet. And we'll get to the reasons right away. Now, here's one very important reason. It's called keeping all our marbles.
Right.
Now, researchers at Rockefeller University in the late 90s and the early 2000s were able to prove that testosterone for men and estrogen for women is one of the biggest protectors against Alzheimer's disease we can get, as well as other mental perturbations. But what did they do? They used neurons from individuals who had died, for example, in car wrecks, but had no neurologic disease at all. And they took the male neurons and put them into a cell culture over here with all the other things you'd find in a brain and nutrients and all that. And they put the female neurons in a different culture over there. And then what they watched under the microscope, of course, is the accumulation of intracellular garbage that, if it accumulates too much, causes Alzheimer's disease. For what it's worth, the big words that we get to charge more for are neurofibrillary tangle and tau protein and beta amyloid. And yes, there's other things, but those are the two that are talked about, the three that are talked about the most. And they saw that they accumulated at a certain rate. All right. Then they put in what they called a physiologic quantity. And that's just a technical word that means that's what belongs there. That's what's usually in brain. Not more, not less, but what belongs there. A physiologic quantity of testosterone in with the male neurons, and they put a physiologic quantity of estrogen in with the female neurons. And they didn't say it was to their amazement, but I bet they were amazed. The accumulation of that intracellular garbage went down by 70 to 80%, John. No kidding, just with adding the hormones, gender specific, to the brain cells. How did that happen? Well, actually, they discovered that too. It seems that the hormone, gender specific, activates the lead enzyme that promotes clean out of the cells.
Oh, boy.
So actually, tau protein, beta amyloid, and neurofibrillary tangle are normal intracellular garbage. But without the testosterone in the male cells and the estrogen in the female cells, the garbage continues to stack up and can't be cleaned out. It's as if they had activated the head of the janitorial crew. And it's one of those few instances when garbage in and garbage out is very, very good for us. Because if our cells are making garbage, our brain cells, then we want to get rid of that garbage, don't we? And it's the sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, which do that for us. So when a guy comes in, a lot of times about his testosterone, what's on his mind is usually a sex life. And I'll tell him, yes, that's important, but here's something that's more important. And I'll tell him about preventing Alzheimer's. It's one of several things that can help to prevent Alzheimer's. Well-researched things, too. I'll tell him, look, you want to focus on testosterone for your brain. Because if you don't, and you get Alzheimer's, then how are you going to remember who you did, what you did with who? Sex won't make any difference to you, will it?
Wow.
But if you use testosterone, then you can remember what you did with who, okay? And not only that, so let's focus on the mental part for a while. And that's what I'll tell the guys. And the ladies who aren't quite as fixated, they still want to keep all their marbles too. So that is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of bioidentical hormone replacement is keeping the brain as intact as we can. Now, there are many other things that it does. Switching over to the ladies for a moment, my goodness, estrogen, progesterone are both very helpful at prevention of osteoporosis. Yes, and also at cutting the risk of cardiovascular disease. And also for appearance, John. There's a website out there. It's called femalenaturalhormones.com, of course, femalenaturalhormones.com. It's got pictures of women who've been using bioidentical hormone replacement for 10 years or more. And they had to send in their driver's licenses, which we promised to destroy as soon as we found out their real age, and we did. So we know exactly how old they were at the time of those pictures. My favorite happens to be an 86-year-old lady who's standing there flexing her biceps and looking at us. She doesn't look 86. But my real favorite is my wife. She's on there at the time her picture was taken. Everybody was guessing she was in her late 50s. She was 72 at the time her picture was taken. And for appearance, which seems to matter a whole lot to ladies and possibly to men, but doesn't seem to be as much, bioidentical hormones really, really help retard the appearance of aging. Look, we're all going to get older sooner or later. It's inevitable. That's the way nature and creation is. But we can retard that appearance of aging quite dramatically. Anyone who's used them for 10 years or more, if she's a lady and she goes to a class reunion, she's definitely looking younger than the rest of her class. No question. But let me get to one other thing for ladies, and that is the lungs. Now, what's not known is that lungs are very dependent on estrogen. Let's consider a disease called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, and emphysema. It's not generally known, but it's in the textbooks, that for non-smokers, people who've never smoked, the incidence of COPD is 6 to 8 women for every 1 man. That's among non-smokers. Oh, could it have anything to do with estrogen? Well, yes. There's a lung research institute at Georgetown University, and they have put out a series of publications that shows that lungs are quite estrogen dependent. No kidding.
Really?
And it's not only the lungs, John, but the whole respiratory vocal apparatus. I can't tell you how many women have told me that after they went on bioidentical hormones, their singing voices are back. And these are mostly women who sing in church choirs, a few women who sing elsewhere. I actually got an unsolicited phone call from a vocal coach who has a whole vocal school in Los Angeles. And since he read about this and was sending his female students, older female students, to doctors who did bioidentical hormones, since he read what I wrote about that he was so surprised that the voices coming back to what they were before menopause. We shouldn't be surprised. When do our voices develop? During puberty, when the sex hormones come on. Isn't that correct? But back to lungs, and then I'll try to get over to guys' benefits for bioidentical hormones. And that is some other researchers, not the Lung Research Institute, but other researchers working with older mice. And here we are with those older mice again. Biopsy the lungs. Oh, yeah, they look like older mouse lungs. And then they put those mice onto estrogen. And what do you know, when they biopsied again later on, now they look like younger mice lungs. Oh, and the researchers at the Lung Research Institute were able to prove that the same things that work on human lungs work on mouse lungs. So a woman who expects to exercise or expects to be able to breathe in and out as well as a guy after menopause, she really needs to consider bioidentical hormones. And I know the research was done on estrogen, but if we use estrogen alone and don't balance it with the rest of the hormones, that's a good way of causing trouble. So those are all of the benefits that are important anyway for the ladies. And then let's get over to the guys. Now for the guys, oh, I forgot one for ladies. Sorry about that, guys. And that is that a small amount of testosterone, a woman-specific amount of testosterone, is important for women too. Why? Well, if you've ever been in a big city, how many more little old ladies are there than little old men? Yep, always more little old ladies. And yes, women do outlive men. That's part of it. But the other part of it is a woman's testosterone is sufficiently low that sometimes when a woman is in her late 70s and 80s, the laboratory can't find any testosterone, whereas a man still has some traces. And how is she going to maintain her muscle mass without testosterone? It's one of the two major hormones that are going to help a woman maintain her muscles. So if she wants to breathe and exercise, she best, as long as she can at whatever she wants to do there, she best consider bioidentical hormones. Okay, over to the guy's side. We'll start with the muscles. There's a condition we were told in medical school. It's called sarcopenia. Again, we have to have a big word here so we can charge more. All that means is my muscles are wasting away in English. And they told us it was inevitable. Men always had sarcopenia by the time they were in their 80s or 90s. You get your testosterone in, guys, and of course it's going to help maintain muscles. Us guys know that. It also helps with less cardiovascular events. I'm not kidding. There's research on that. Yeah, less cardiovascular events. Now, that's if you use the correct quantity. If you use too much, yeah, it's going to get you in trouble. But less cardiovascular events, less osteoporosis, and apparently men's lungs don't get into trouble like women's lungs do because men's testosterone can be transformed, I am not kidding, into estrogen by local enzymes. And since a man's testosterone goes down more slowly than women's, the chances are his testosterone is being used to turn into estrogen to help his lungs like estrogen helps women's lungs. So basically those, and of course it helps a guy maintain his sex life. But again, we have to use it safely and effectively. Those are the reasons, John, that both genders should consider anyway, using bioidentical hormone replacement.
You know, now I'm just all over the place here because you're full immersion and now I am, so I'm playing catch up real quick. So the depletion of these hormones, I take it that this is naturally occurring over time, but I'm wondering, do allergens contribute to the depletion of these vital hormones?
You're close. It's toxins. For example, lead and cadmium will block a guy's testosterone production. A whole lot of the pesticides and herbicides, do they mess with a lot of things. Estrogen, testosterone. Oh, John, here's a fun one. Did you know that an act of Congress caused alligators in the Everglades to be sterile?
No, I didn't know that.
I know it was in National Geographic, and one can look it up. It seems they passed something called the sugar tariff because overseas countries were sending in sugar at 2 cents a pound, and it would cost 10 cents a pound, apparently, to produce it in the United States. So guess who got campaign contributions from the Florida sugar growers? You can guess, some members of Congress, who managed to pass a sugar tariff, which raised the price of importing overseas sugar to the point where they were no longer competitive, and the Florida sugar growers, therefore, had the market. And so they expanded their fields right up to the margins of the Everglades, and they were spraying and spraying and spraying with herbicides and pesticides. And then somebody wondered why the male alligators weren't able to get the lady alligators pregnant. And so they sent in the researchers, and they found that the relevant organ on the male alligators couldn't get into the relevant organ on the female alligators to get them pregnant in the first place. And they called that microcephalic, of course. And they found that microcephalic condition was due to the so-called environmental estrogens, because so many of the herbicides and pesticides mimic estrogen, but they don't do quite what estrogen does. Oh, and by the way, that sugar tariff not only caused microcephalic alligators, but it also caused the obesity epidemic. Isn't politics wonderful, John? You keep explaining that to us all on your programs, how wonderful it is. Not. Yes, because you see, the corn growers in the Midwest saw an opportunity, and that's when high fructose corn sugar took off. When we were growing up, John, we didn't hear a whole lot about high fructose corn syrup, but after the sugar tariff, my goodness, here comes high fructose corn syrup to compete with high-priced sucrose.
No kidding. So that's what it is. And when was this? When was this? When was this bill passed? What year? Do you know?
1970, I believe, or very close to that.
Yeah, the only time I ever saw corn syrup employed at all was to make popcorn balls. That was it, to stick the popcorn together. That was it. Nobody was cooking with that stuff.
Well, we can thank the politicians again for all of those consequences.
You know, it's just extraordinary to me. And I know you're not an economist, but I also know you're a thinking man. But what is it that's so hard to figure out here? If you continue to raise prices on everything, you're going to need more money. If you print more money, you've devalued the money that you already have. And now, you know, over the course of many conversations with these extremely learned individuals, I mean, no racehorse wins every time. I mean, some have been called like a blind squirrel. They wander around every once in a while. They find a nut. Well, that's fine. I mean, if it's a spectacular nut, then I'm okay with that. But it's just, I don't understand why the public has allowed this to happen, and yet on the other hand I do, because I suppose it's just so complex they don't have time to keep up with all of it, let alone take any action on it, even so much as sending an email or a letter. So it's only through speaking with someone like yourself, you know, about your area of expertise. It's the only shot that we have at bypassing the propaganda machine. And that's pretty much it. For example, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Well, thank you, John. There's an organization in Washington, D.C. That helps us all with doing something about what various federal agencies are doing in the area of health care. I wish there were ones in other areas. It's called the Alliance for Natural Health. Alliance for Natural Health, one can find their website at anh-usa.org. Among very many other things, they happen to be the publisher of the monthly newsletter I do. It's in an electronic version as well as an on-paper version, and it's really inexpensive. That one's called Green Medicine. But back to what they do. They are constantly monitoring things that federal agencies, particularly Los Federales at FDA, some at the FTC, and then in Congress, are doing that's going to mess up our health in one way or another. One can join them for free, no kidding. And they send out weekly bulletins, and sometimes in those bulletins is an action alert. Now, let me tell you, getting back to hormones, but also politics. Sorry about that, folks. We'll get more to just plain hormones shortly. In 2008, Los Federales at FDA sent out a letter to all the compounding pharmacies. And it said, thou shalt not prescribe estriol anymore, compound estriol anymore. Now, estriol is a very important part of bioidentical hormones. It keeps them safe for women. But they had gotten a citizen's petition, John, from the Wyeth Company. Now, if I had sent them a citizen's petition, they would have paid no attention. But I guess the Wyeth Company fulfills Mitt Romney's definition of a living entity, namely a corporation. So they sent in a citizen petition complaining about estriol. So Los Federales wanted to get rid of it. The Alliance for Natural Health, anh-usa.org, at that time had 200,000 or 300,000 members. They now have 700,000 or 800,000 members. They sent an action alert to every one of their members via email, and it was so simple. It explained what the problem was. They always explain it very, what shall I say, accurately, but also briefly. And then you go over here, you click over here, and here's a letter, and it was addressed to your member of Congress. They know who your member of Congress is from your zip code, and also your 2 senators. And the letter protested what they were doing to estriol. You could either just click here, the whole process takes you about 10 seconds, and send it to your member of Congress. There's no point sending it to the FDA. They won't pay any attention. They're not elected. The Congress got, within 2 weeks, over 100,000 emails on the topic, John. And what do you know? Los Federales dropped it. And we could still get estriol in bioidentical hormone replacement. Now, my favorite email that was saved by Alliance for Natural Health went to her representative, and it said, Representative so-and-so, if you do this to my bioidentical hormones and outlaw estriol, I'm going to come down to your office and have PMS once a month.
Wow. Okay, take it easy. Take it easy.
Yeah. But you see, we can, if we are a member of Alliance for Natural Health, and again, there's no charge. There's charge for my newsletter, but what is it, $25 a year? Yes. We can influence things with only a few seconds. We don't have to write a letter. We don't have to call. We just click over here. We can either use the letter that's pre-made. We can write our own, like that lady did about PMS. And if enough of us do that, it does have influence.
So when you say bioidentical, this means that it's not that you have to, it's not like gene matching or something like that. It is, it's just the bioidentical means the identical hormone that you had to begin with, and it's the same hormone that everybody has. So it's not a big, you don't have to customize it to the person. Well, let me ask, go ahead. Or do you?
Have to customize doses to the person, but the molecules themselves, we all have testosterone, we all have estrogen, we all have DHEA, we all have thyroid, we all have oxytocin, etc. So what's meant is the molecules are precisely identical.
Do you, just by chance, do you do anything along the lines of a chelation?
Yes, sir, we do.
Well, I got a question for you. Is it possible? They were using let me start over. I'm wondering about dentistry. I'm wondering about people have implants and they got metal screws that go into the very bone. Some of them have these permanent retainers that are made out of stainless steel, or maybe there's nickel in it also. Have you come across some cases where some actual poisoning was going on?
Unfortunately, a few. The worst I can think of was a young man who, for whatever reason, had mercury fillings put into 14 teeth all in one sitting.
Oh, Lord.
And my, was he in trouble. He was having intermittent seizures. He was writhing around on the floor. Then he'd be normal. Then he'd writhe around on the floor. So, yeah, he not only needed chelation to get the mercury out, but he also needed to get something else done besides mercury fillings. Things should have been outlawed, John, but they're still legal.
They still use mercury fillings, really?
A few dentists do. Yeah.
Wow, that's extraordinary. It sounds like the old gold fillings were the best idea of them all.
That's right. They're inert. They don't, and if they do get into the body, they're not harmful in the degree that gets into the body.
Isn't that something? Let me ask you another question. You hear a lot of commercials. You can't help it. I mean, AM radio is notorious for this. They're either, as I like to say, either selling you a product that makes things draw up, which should draw up, things which are hanging down, which should draw up, and things which are drawing up, which now hang down. They got all kinds of stuff, starting with testosterone boosters. Is there any value to any of that stuff? My opinion is there is no value in it whatsoever because they're all precursors.
Well, there is some value to some of them, but you have to be very careful and know which things actually are known to increase testosterone. But before we even get there, John, remember a lot of the problem is the testosterone is being repressed. And what I mean by repressed is all of the environmental pollutants that get into our bodies, even though they're phony estrogens, they really mess with the guy's testosterone production. And we can take, even if we take a formula which has in it only things which are scientifically validated to raise testosterone, and yes, there is one of those, even if we take that, if we don't get the lid off, and the lid is being put on by all the environmental pollution and the cadmium and the lead and so forth, it isn't going to help. We have to de-repress first before we can stimulate. And the best way of de-repressing happens to be heavy sweating. I'm not kidding. There was actually a research study where, and by the way, this one was funded by the Church of Scientology, even though it was done at one of the major universities in Southern California. Got to give them credit for that. Fat biopsies were done. Biopsy the fat, send it off to toxicology lab. Oh my God, look at all those toxins. All right, then the people did 30 episodes of heavy sweating, 35 to 40 minutes, sweating, drenched, however you want to do it. Exercise, go lie on the beach where it's really hot, get into a sauna, whatever you like to do. But sweat for 35 to 40 minutes, 30 episodes. And then they biopsy the fat cells again. Look at that. The toxic load burden is down by 2/3. No kidding. So if we want to raise our hormone levels on our own, the first thing we got to do these days with all the pollution that's known to be out there, remember the alligators from the sugar tariff, we got to get the toxins out of our systems, and sweating is the best way of getting out the ones that are stored in fat cells. Having said that, cadmium and lead can block testosterone production for guys. It can mess with the ladies' estrogen too. So for those, chelation is much more effective than sweating. We can't sweat out lead or cadmium. We can sweat out all the environmental pollutants. So basically, a guy comes in, he's in his 40s, his testosterone is starting to go low. Am I exaggerating? No. Over in Eastern Washington, a colleague of mine is running into men in their late 20s who are agricultural field workers whose testosterone is low. No question. Of course, they're spraying and so forth, and that's where a lot of it's coming from. So the first step is detoxification. And then the second step is using, and there is a single formula out there, it's called Vicarin, Vicarin. And yes, I did put it together, no question. I couldn't find another one out there that had all the ingredients that are scientifically verified to raise testosterone, but I can't recommend it unless we've detoxified first. We've got to get those toxins out.
What about HGH? There were a couple of pretty good products out there in the late 90s and then in the early 2000s. I understand. Well, one of them just completely went away. And then there was an outfit called Cocoon Nutrition. I used to hear their commercials all the time. Mm-hmm. And it came to me through, I don't know, half a dozen channels that those guys got rated by everybody.
Unfortunately, HGH is still way too much of political football. In Washington State, sorry to say, most doctors who prescribe HGH get pursued by the state medical board, and they happen to issue penalties that are a lot harsher for alternative doctors. This is, by the way, research proven by computer database search of state board penalties. The alternative medicine doctors get their licenses suspended for prescribing HGH. The regular doctors get a slap on the wrist. They have to write a letter and get a $1,000 fine. But that's that aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that it's legal in Nevada, so anybody who wants HGH should go to a responsible doctor in Nevada from Washington State, but it is part of bioidentical hormone replacement. Now, since we can't replace it in Washington State, what do? There also are things which will stimulate growth hormone, or HGH, and we always measure that as part of an overall measurement of a person's hormone. Why would we want growth hormone? We're not growing anymore. Yes, but it's mislabeled. That was the first thing it was found to be good for. It's also good for repairs. It helps build new cells. It helps when the old cells go away, we need new ones. It helps in that process. So it should be called growth and repair hormone. But again, it's a political football. Apparently, the politicians just don't like people getting either elected governor of California or hitting too many home runs. And so they're going after HGH.
Do you get the feeling sometimes that it's not wanted, that people live beyond their 25 or 30 years of productive work, according to the old school algorithm? You know, you put in your 20 years and you retire, you put in your 30 years and retire, and then just go away. They really don't want to pay the pensions. They really don't want the additional burdens, with quotes around the word, of health care and all this stuff. I mean, I get the distinct impression that they want us to just put our time in and then go away, you know?
Well, I have a possibly different view, but I know you share this one too, and that is our present healthcare industry is all about money and secondarily about health. And we can make a whole lot more money on stuff we can patent. And oh, by the way, if it happens to have a side effect of making people less healthy, okay, that's fine too. It's not just our healthcare industry. Look at the whole thing about, and you know about this, you've had people on, John, and I appreciate that very much, whole thing about GMO foods, environmental toxins, and so forth and so forth. Look how many megabucks are made on those things. Oh, until their patents run out and then they come up with another environmental toxin, right?
Yeah.
It's more about money, I think, than having people die off, although I don't think anybody minds if they die off young.
Now, what about hearing? I experienced the strangest thing, and I'll just tell it to you briefly. I mean, one of the fellows at Coast to Coast AM just withdrew, I'm pretty sure, from broadcasting altogether. I mean, I don't know if he still does his morning show or whatever up in the Twin Cities, but he had tinnitus so bad that he was just miserable all the time with it. And then, of course, the motorcycle pipes are on the right side. The Marshall amplifier is on the right side, and the pistol is held by the right hand, so your ear gets, well, an earful every time you do anything. And it was the strangest thing. About, a couple of 3 months ago, I heard this little snapping noise, like one of those little clicking insects, or like when you put your fingernail, just put your thumbnail under your little fingernail and kind of click it up and make just a little click. And I thought, what is that? I even looked over my shoulder. I thought there was an insect had landed on me. It turns out it was my ear doing it. And so I asked, it started doing it again a couple of weeks later, just for a few seconds. And I said, can you hear that? And it's like, yes, actually I can. What is that? I said, it's my ear. So I went up on the net and looked around. They went, yep, there's a form of tinnitus, or tinnitus, as some people say, that actually results in audible noises coming from your ear. And I thought, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into now? Put that guitar away and turn that amp off and don't pick it up for a while. What about bioidentical hormone replacement actually improving hearing?
Yes, but not the type of hearing that's caused by loud noise, explosions, and you're telling me about that can also lead to tinnitus. There's simply age-related hearing loss that is not necessarily related to loud noises. And a professor at Oregon University of Health Sciences was able to prove in experimental animals that the hormone aldosterone, one of the ones you had fun with pronouncing there, that particular hormone was able to restore hearing in experimental animals. So I have the good fortune to work with a number of engineers. Those guys are organized. And in the early 2000s, in comes an engineer with a copy of the research paper from the professor in Oregon, and he says, I want to try some of that stuff. Well, I'd been working with it before for other reasons, aldosterone, through Cripps Pharmacy, interestingly enough, in Vancouver, BC. They seem to be able to get things earlier than many other people. But I told him it wasn't going to do any good unless his own aldosterone levels were low. So we checked his aldosterone levels. They were almost non-existent. He took the aldosterone. His hearing came back in one ear. He was already permanently deaf in the other, so it only came back in one ear. And here it is, 2016, and he's still got his hearing. Now, he was a through and through engineer. So he decided to prove that the aldosterone was actually working, and he went off it. This is in the early days of his use of it, and his hearing went away. So he went back on the aldosterone, and his hearing came back. He did that 3 times. And John, I bet you can guess who put it into his engineering approach? His wife. He told me, I did not hear this from her, but he told me that his wife had said to him the equivalent of, "Dear, I'm not going to live with a man who was totally deaf, remember, who's already deaf in one ear, if he can prevent it." She says, "You go off that stuff again and we're getting a divorce."
Wow.
And he said, she was serious. So I'm back on my aldosterone. I'm going to stay there. And we have to do something that is so important to keeping hormones safe. We had to monitor his levels for the first 2 or 3 years. We want to make sure not only is the hormone bioidentical, but it also is in his body in the quantities that should be in his body. There's a usual range for humans. And if we exceed that or we're below that, I'm sorry, if it's below that, we're not going to get anywhere. And if we exceed that, we might cause trouble, which gets me back to using safe and effective bioidentical hormones. One thing that needs to be done always, always, always is adequate monitoring. You need to be working with a physician who's skilled and knowledgeable in bioidentical hormones. And we have to monitor things as accurately as we can, which, by the way, happens to mean a lot of urine testing, not just blood testing, because the metabolites of estrogen that are called the free fractions, and the free fractions of any hormone are the active fractions. And then there's a big fraction which is bound up on this big old protein, and it really can't do anything, and that's called the total. But a little percent of that, no kidding, approximately 0.5 to 1% of all hormones are available in the free fraction. The rest is bound up doing nothing, and who knows why nature and creation has designed it that way, but that's the way it is. Free estrogens can't be measured in blood. They can't. They only measure the total estrogens. So particularly ladies are stuck with doing follow-up urine tests to make sure their estrogens are not too high, not too low, and not only that, but they're metabolizing properly. There are pro- and anti-carcinogenic estrogens, and there are pro- and anti-carcinogenic testosterones. And of course, we want more of the anti-carcinogens than the pro-carcinogens. And the human body is actually evolved, created, whatever we'd like, because I don't know who your audience is, to have more anti-carcinogens than pro-carcinogens. But, just for example, if a woman's body doesn't have enough iodine, her body won't turn out adequate estriol. And in the early days of doing this, John, what was being given out? Well, Premin or estradiol that they'd have people swallow. And estradiol is supposed to turn into estriol, but I came across a significant minority of women whose bodies didn't turn it into estriol. So that's why estriol is such a important component of the hormone replacement. But I subsequently learned that if we have enough iodine in the body, well, now we'll make the anti-carcinogen. Now for men, there also is an anti-carcinogenic testosterone. It only is anti-carcinogenic. And there are pro-carcinogenic testosterones too. But if we have enough of this anti-carcinogen, it helps to protect us. And that has a name that's that long, so I won't bother to tell you what it is. For short, it's called 3-beta-adiol. And our bodies make more of that if we use, of all things, coconut oil and olive oil. There's nothing patentable here, John. Darn it. So we monitor for quantity of hormone We monitor for pro and anti-carcinogenic properties of the hormones. Now, that doesn't mean we have to monitor for the next 20 years and cost people a lot of money. No, that monitoring is done in the early stages, and then when we find out, and it usually does take a year or two, okay, what quantities are right for that person, what has to be done for their pro and anti-carcinogens. When we find all that out, it usually continues to work for them, and we don't have to monitor them all the time. So that's a very important part of bioidentical hormone replacement is appropriate monitoring. We cannot do a saliva test, for example, and measure all the things we can measure in a urine specimen. And the blood tests, they're very useful for guys for testosterone, free testosterone, but we all know in medicine, and it's a public health service of all places, that 1 in 3 of us here in these United States is unfortunately headed for type 2 diabetes if we don't watch it. And guys who are headed for type 2 diabetes, and that's still 1 in 3 guys, the process of proceeding towards type 2 diabetes, which involves an overly high insulin signal. We've heard about insulin resistance and overly high insulin signals, and that's part of the progress, if we want to call it that, toward type 2 diabetes. Gets the guy's testosterone to turn into estrogen. Oy! Just because we're from a family that has type 2 diabetes, we have a higher risk of our testosterone going into estrogen? Yes, we do. Oh, by the way, that's entirely natural. That's the way the original design is. Where do ladies get their estrogen? They have this enzyme that turns it into testosterone very efficiently. And just ask any woman, us guys are slow. And so our bodies have that same enzyme, but it works very slowly. And so us guys keep mostly testosterone and we have a little bit of estrogen unless we're pre-diabetic, in which case it speeds up that process, which is another thing we've got to watch out for. Again, you got to be working with a doctor who's skilled and knowledgeable in natural medicine. They hopefully will know all this. If they're skilled and knowledgeable, they will. A couple other things I want to ramble on about, John. Thank you so much for your patience. And that is, never, ever, ever take the steroid hormones, testosterone, estrogen, DHEA, aldosterone. What did I leave out? Never take them orally. Never, ever, ever.
Really?
Estrogens, the evidence has been there for 2 decades. It creates an inflammation in the liver if we take estrogens orally, and we have more tendency to blood clotting. No, don't do it that way. And yet there's still some places that are having women take estrogens orally. Come on. It's been in the literature for 2 decades about blood clotting and excess liver inflammation. Testosterone, orally? No, it doesn't create as bad troubles as the estrogen does. But let's go to what nature and creation has done for us. Where do our sex hormones originate? Testicles and ovaries. And where do they go from there? Well, they go into these little tiny veins that carry them to the bigger blood vein at the lower part of the abdomen, which carries them up to the heart. And the heart sends that hormone to every cell in the body before it goes past the liver. And the liver's job is to dispose of the hormones. Hey, if the liver didn't dispose of hormones and we were all 18 or 19 years old, we'd be, but possibly more sex maniacs because we'd have these hormones that are up this high. So the liver gets rid of a little bit of them every day. If we swallow the stuff, and the best example I know of there for poor metabolism is DHEA. If we swallow DHEA, and I'm sorry, way too many people do, it's in all the health food stores in capsules. For guys, sorry guys, but I can always tell a guy who's taking oral DHEA because he's got too much estrone in his urine. That big blast of DHEA to the liver says, I can't handle this, I'm going to turn it into estrone. So guys, if you want extra estrogen, just take oral DHEA. That'll do it to you. And for women, it turns into estrone there too, but estrone is a procarcinogen. Do you really want more of that? No. So oral use of these hormones is a very bad idea. They should be rubbed on, and the most receptive surface is what's called a mucous membrane. And I hope there's no children listening, because mucous membranes in the pelvic area are the inner labia, the inner surface of the outer labia, the vaginal area. And for guys, where's the mucous membrane in the pelvic region? I'm sorry, where we would grow a hemorrhoid, if we were going to grow a hemorrhoid, it's called the perianal mucosa. But experience and testing has taught me over the last, 20? almost 30 years with the bioidentical hormones, that if they're rubbed into mucous membranes, they will keep getting in. They will never quit. Whereas rubbed into skin, they frequently start to fail in a few months to a few years. And then there's one other thing, and I know I'm going on.
No, it's all right. Please do. It's good.
That I need to bring up besides rubbing them in, and that's the timing. Timing is so important. I should go around with a little sign that says copy nature, John. I really should, because women, unfortunately, are being mistreated with estrogen and progesterone in pellets. What's a pellet? It's something you put in under your skin, and it gives off hormone. All right?
Yeah.
Why did I say men? Well, remember, some women say, guys are very boring. Testosterone all the time. I'm sorry, but that's what nature creation does. Helps to continue the species here. Yeah, guys turn out testosterone from puberty until their testosterone goes away, if it ever does, every day, every day. Women's bodies don't do that with estrogen or progesterone. Every month from menarche to menopause, there's a drop-off. That's called the menstrual period, right? I didn't say the hormones went away completely, but they drop way off.
Yeah.
And what do pellets do? They persist with the same amount of hormone with no break. And there are still physicians who prescribe estrogen and progesterone for ladies, along with DHEA and testosterone. Those are the 4 steroids for ladies. And they don't give it a break. Tell them, well, just do it every day. All right, let me tell you about this study from Europe. 130,000 women, actually it was more than that, but I can't remember all the other digits, so I'll say 130,000. The ones who took a monthly break from their hormones compared to the ones who just took them every day, the ones who took them every day, John, had 40% more, actually it was 44% more breast cancer than the women who took a monthly break. 44% more breast cancer. So pellets are actually putting women at risk. They should be, in my opinion, rubbed into a mucous membrane. If you got to rub them into skin because you can't stand that, okay, but you got to monitor more often. And you got to leave them off for anywhere from 2 to 3 to sometimes 4 days a month. How do you know? Well, if you're a lady, you know how many days each month you had the heavier menstrual bleeding. I'm not talking about just a little bit here or there. And those are the days when you should cut back. Actually, you should eliminate the estrogen progesterone each month. And don't take them every day, please. So there's a matter of timing. For guys, we can take our testosterone all the time. For ladies, so pellets for guys, if a guy wants to do that, fine. I don't recommend it for other reasons, but that's another story. The timing is important. The route of administration, how does it get into the body, and the safety monitoring, all that have to be done to keep bioidentical hormones safe. It sounds complicated, but it's no harder to learn than anything else we do in medical practice. And I wish there weren't so many. I even know of a professor who recommends taking oral estrogen. Boy, I wish there weren't so many who don't use it in the safest, most effective manner. And it's time for me to shut up.
Let me ask you this: is what is there anything to suggest that not taking this progesterone, right, on a reasonable schedule, which organs would be the most likely to have problems?
Progesterone, we can start with bone. A professor at University of British Columbia, she did a really, really neat job of being able, by what she did was scan, I forgot what she used. She scanned the variability in bones according to time of the menstrual cycle. And what she found is that they were thickest during the second half of the menstrual cycle, when, of course, women make more progesterone after ovulation. And then it thinned out somewhat, and it thickened and thinned and thickened and thinned, the bone did. Now, it wasn't any great quantity every month, but she was able to detect small changes in bone density that progesterone caused when it came on after ovulation. So I'd say I'd go to bone first. But brain is a close second. Now, there's one exception to don't take your hormones by mouth. well researched by French doctors, and when something is well researched to be safe, all right, I'll go along with it. Women who have problems with anxiety or problems sleeping almost always find that if they take some progesterone orally, it helps calm things down, it helps them to sleep. And what the French professors found is that the liver's actually turning that progesterone into a natural human tranquilizer. It's a molecule that the human body usually makes, which is why it's tolerable, but the human body doesn't usually make much of it. But when you present the liver with all this progesterone, wow, the body starts turning out a lot of this natural tranquilizer, and people do sleep better and they're less anxious.
What about the pancreas?
Anything for the pancreas? Well, as part of overall bioidentical hormone replacement, there are two other hormones that we look at because they decline with time. Nearly all hormones decline with time. The only one that doesn't decline much with time is cortisol. That one's so important that if we had that removed, we drop dead in 2 days. So it declines to about 90% by the time we're 90, but all the other ones decline a lot more. Back to your question, John. There is a hormone named melatonin, which we've all heard of. It's a sleep aid for some of us. And there's another one called oxytocin. And both of them, well, with younger women who have lower melatonin, they have more chance of type 2 diabetes. The melatonin helps the pancreatic islet cells. Those are the cells that make insulin. And so does the oxytocin. Oxytocin, what's that? That's the hormone that comes out in a great flood when a woman bears her baby or have childbirth. But it's also been found that oxytocin does so many other things. It's a semi-major to major pain reliever. People who are in chronic pain, they use oxytocin, they have less chronic pain. I didn't say it went away, but they have less and they require less pain. But back to the pancreas, oxytocin also has an influence on pancreatic islet cells. Again, those are the cells that make insulin. So particularly people over 60 will monitor their melatonin and oxytocin, and those are available through compounding pharmacies should we need them.
Excellent. Okay, Doctor, I know there's a bunch of stuff that you wanted to discuss here, and we tend to linger on certain points because they're interesting. But sure. What about just take it wherever you want to go. I'm seeing stuff on here, everything from gestational diabetes. Say, what's up with all this diabetes? That seems to be a good place to start. It seems almost as though the American diet is ruinous. I don't know of diabetic levels like American diabetic levels anywhere else in the world. Is that true or not?
Well, I suspect they're as high in China right now. At least that's what I've been reading about, since they adopted a lot of the Western diet. But really, it's not entirely diet caused, John. If we're talking type 1 diabetes, that's a different story, but type 2 is the one that's more rampant anyway.
Yeah.
And that requires a genetic predisposition. No kidding. Research has proven that. It's a genetic predisposition where that person is much more sensitive to the effects of sugar and carbohydrates. And in effect, sugar and carbohydrates put on 3 times as much weight. This is from real research by Professor John Yudkin. Sugar and carbohydrates put on 3 times as much weight with the same number of calories. That's what Yudkin proved in people who have the genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes. Now, why would people have the genetic predisposition? Because back in caveman days, we needed to put on all the fat we could so we could get through the hard winters when there wasn't much food. And so people who had that particular, it's called a mutation from the rest of the species, they actually survived better. But now that we have food every place, and particularly sugar and carbs all over the place, if we have that genetic predisposition, and that's 1 in 3 of us, we're going to put on weight 3 times as more rapidly with the same amount of calories, and we're going to get that type 2 diabetes, so it's all coming out. Now, that's one of the topics that I wanted to go over with you. But let me say that all of this, gestational diabetes, regular diabetes, the first issue of Green Medicine newsletter was called Triple Fat Gainers. And it talked about the genetic predisposition to gain 3 times as much weight on the same calories. It's the people who can walk by the bakery and gain weight, whereas 2 out of 3 can walk by the bakery and not gain weight. That newsletter will be discussing all the things that we're not going to have time to talk about tonight, John, or I won't have time to carry on. I'm sorry I'm doing so much talking. So let me give you the list, and then we'll go back to the particulars that you pick on. One, there is effective treatment for glaucoma, proven in 1937, no kidding, that works in 50% of the individuals with glaucoma. I wish it worked in everybody. It doesn't, but 50% isn't bad. Number two, we can prevent joint replacement therapy. That was in the September issue of Green Medicine Newsletter. It is entirely preventable. This is all based on the work of a doctor from the 1940s who told us how to stop the progression of osteoarthritis cold. So it didn't progress any further, and we don't need joint replacement surgery as a consequence. The D-mannose and bladder infection, I definitely want to come back to that one. That's mentioned in the newsletter. It works on 90% of bladder infections. There's that topic of ultraviolet blood irradiation and how it will kill just about any microorganism. We don't have to worry about is it antibiotic resistant or not. Fibrocystic breast disease. Now that's going to be in the newsletter after the first of the year. I learned from Dr. John Myers how to help women cure that every time. And we don't get to say 100% of the time very often, but there hasn't been a woman since 1976. When I learned this from Dr. Myers, there hasn't been a woman who has kept fibrocystic breast disease. It's all gone with Dr. Myers' treatment, and it's a safe one, too. Then there's something called acne rosacea, when we get all red in the face, and it's different from regular acne. There's research from the 20s, 30s, and 40s that showed what the root of that was. If we address the root, the rosacea goes. Gestational diabetes. That's not at all the same as type 2 or type 1 diabetes. I'll come back to that because John started there. Thank you, John. But also a couple of other topics that are going to show up in the newsletter. One, women with very, very heavy menstrual bleeding. It's called menorrhagia. South African Medical Journal publication from 1977 either got it back to normal or made a major improvement in 92% of the women who have heavy menstrual bleeding. This is a simple one. You don't even need to read the newsletter. The researchers found that 50,000 units of vitamin A day took care of it 92% of the time. And then lastly, there's the business about donating blood and cutting your risk of heart attack and stroke. That is dramatic. That was covered in the newsletter in April, I believe, and the science behind it. Yes, this is a little bit of advertisement for the newsletter. You might be interested in these topics. It's called Green Medicine Newsletter. It's available through all the W's and www.anh-usa.org. And thank you for letting me do that, John. And shall we go back to gestational diabetes?
Yes, please.
Okay. Gestational diabetes simply means diabetes when you're pregnant. Now, there's research starting in the 1940s. No kidding. And for those who are technically inclined, the August issue of Green Medicine Newsletter gives all the footnotes. You can go look it up. So very briefly, what the research showed was it has nothing at all to do with the food we're consuming. Isn't that interesting? Well, if we don't eat any food, we won't get it. But what I mean is it had nothing to do with the food composition of what we're eating. What it has everything to do with is all that estrogen that happens normally during a pregnancy. Now, all that estrogen, and remember, this wasn't just one researcher, it's a whole series of researchers proved this. All that extra estrogen puts pressure on enzymes that depend on vitamin B6.
Okay.
It only does that for some women. They have weakness in that enzyme system. Most women, no, it still puts pressure on, but they've got strong enzyme systems. These are weak. The estrogen puts pressure on them. They depend on vitamin B6. Okay, when all the estrogen pressure, something that is usually produced in our bodies, it has this long, long name called xanthurenic acid, and you can find that in everybody's urine. Let's call it XA. XA is produced in small quantities in everybody's urine, but when the estrogen pressure comes down onto that weak enzyme system, lots more XA is made. Now that XA, what does it do? It binds insulin. So the insulin can't work anymore. Nothing to do with what we ate or didn't eat. Yeah, your mother could have this problem too. So you might think, oh, it runs in families. Well, yeah, if you have this weak enzyme system. Yeah.
Man.
So what do we do? It's real simple. There are two research trials in the 1970s where women were given, or asked to take, I should say, vitamin B6. And these days we want to take a form of vitamin B6 called pyridoxal 5-phosphate, or P5P, it says on the label in the health food store. They were asked to take 100 milligrams of vitamin B6. These days it'd be 50 milligrams of P5Ps twice a day because the P5P is even more efficient and they're both natural. And John, 92% of those women had no more gestational diabetes in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And the reason I'm yelling and screaming here is this was done in 1970s. And when I checked online with the American Diabetes Association and the Mayo Clinic and other places like that about what to do about type 2 diabetes, about gestational diabetes, they tell us all about, oh, it's type 2 diabetes and you're pregnant. It is not. You can cut your carbs to nothing and you'll still have gestational diabetes because this is not due to the carbohydrates. It's due to this normal metabolite. This metabolite is made from tryptophan in our bodies, and all of us have a little bit in our urine if we ever get tested. This normal metabolite at low levels does not make enough to bind the insulin, but when we have all that estrogen load, oh yes, and this can happen with birth control pills too, because they're nasty estrogens in birth control pills. Anyway, when we have all that estrogen load, up goes these anthurenic acid, or XA. It combines with the insulin. The insulin can't work, so of course we're diabetic. So what do? John, it is looking for the cause. And the cause was researched and found from the 1940s to the 1970s. The cause is weak vitamin B6 dependent enzymes. Give them some B6, it goes away 92% of the time. I said that once already. I'm sorry I get so exercised about this, but we should not be having any women in our country anymore who have gestational diabetes. And it's been known since the 70s. So thank you for helping me get the word out, John. Time for me to shut up. You pick on some other topic.
Well, it's my pleasure to do it, but I always go to the why is this being allowed to happen? I don't understand why. I just don't understand why we can't seem to make any progress outside of these wonderful, dare I say, boutique researchers and clinics where, stuff is actually being done. I went to the websites. I went to female natural, whatever it is. Wait a second. I've got it right here.
Female natural hormones.
Yeah, female natural hormones. It's like testimonial after testimonial. These are obviously they're real people, and it's clearly not contrived. And I go over to your site, and you've got all these testimonials there. So I guess if it's not on TV all over the place, it just remains in the darkness, except to the savvy few who will actually go out and seek you out and say, look, I've got a problem. Nobody seems to be able to address it that's in the regular mainstream medical community. Can you help me out here? And then
I can, John.
It's just weird.
With this question, and that is, there's no big bucks to be made. How much money can you make on vitamin B6 in your health food store? If somebody had a patent medicine for gestational diabetes, you can bet it would be all over TV, just like you said.
Yeah, well, it's the money and the Russians every time, right?
I don't know about the Russians, but it's the money. And speaking of that female natural hormone website, John, my wife allows me to do this, and I'm sorry, I'm just proud of her. So here we go. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. This picture was taken when she was how old, John?
You know what? She has one of those faces. She could be any age, starting at about, I'd say, maybe like 45 something.
Okay. Enough of that. She was 73 when the picture was taken.
She was 73 when that picture was taken.
Yes, sir. And that's what bioidentical hormones will help do for women.
73.
I'm not kidding.
Okay. I'm sold.
but we're not ladies. We can't look that good, John.
Well, I know, it's just the way it is. But it's only natural. We're supposed to be missing some teeth, from having them punched out, and women are not supposed to look like that. They're supposed to remain orchid-like for, Well, then let me ask you this. It's more, this bioidentical hormone replacement is much better. Haven't we established it's pretty much vital for women, but what about the guys? What will it do for them? Will they turn blonde-haired and blue-eyed, or what?
Nope. It will help the skin not get rough and aged as much.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help as much as it does the ladies. The big deal for the guys is keeping our brains, and it does rather keep the sex life going if we have a cooperative partner.
Okay, but the number one improvement is brain stability, yeah?
You bet. If we don't have that, we've got Washington, D.C.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, 10 square miles is enough of that nonsense for sure. Okay, where are we going next?
All right. Well, let's go to bladder infections, just simply because this is a fairly simple one. The paper published in 1980, a research paper, that's what I'm talking about. You want a new idea? Go to an old book, quoting John B. Wells. In 1980, which I just happened to read in about 1985 or 1986, told us that a simple sugar, which is present in our bodies, and now is present in all the health food stores, called D-mannose, that simple sugar prevents the E. coli, which is the most common form of bladder infection bacteria. Roughly 90%, maybe 85, maybe 95, but somewhere in there, bladder infections are caused by E. coli bacteria. It prevents that little bacteria from adhering to the inside wall of the bladder. And how it adheres to the inside wall of the bladder, that little bacteria, is actually by sticking to the cell wall of the inside of the bladder, which has a little tiny bit of D-mannose in it. No kidding, there's D-mannose in the membranes of the cells that line the bladder. What this scientist found is that enough D-mannose, and funny thing, it can't adhere. Well, here's my explanation of that. The D-mannose, the E. coli, why are 90% approximately of bladder infections just this one bacteria? Because it takes advantage of the D-mannose in the cell membranes, and like Spider-Man, it can stick and stick and stick and stick and crawl up inside the bladder. So a young lady comes in, she's 8 years old, she's brought in by her parents. She's being told that she's had so many kidney infections and the antibiotics are not working. This is in the 1980s. I should say they're working less well than they should. And what are they going to do? Because they've been told that their 8-year-old daughter might need a kidney transplant before she grows up because of all of her infections. Mom, very fortunately, kept awfully good records on this child. She brought in 2 scrapbooks and she could find anything she wanted to. So I asked her, what kind of infections were they? And she says, well, they were all E. coli infections. Oh, okay. And Mom says, and by the way, she's seen 74 different doctors and she's been to the Children's Hospital a number of times, and they're just running out of options with antibiotics. So I told her about the D-mannose. It wasn't on the market at that time. She said, can we get some? I said, yes, I think we can. Chemical supply houses carry the stuff. If you don't tell them what it's for, they'll sell it to you. So we got in some D-mannose. That young lady started taking the D-mannose. The next time she had a bladder infection, she was 14. When she and her family went on vacation and forgot the D-mannose. And then when she went into puberty, the estrogens and progesterone made her lining of her bladder and her vaginal area and all that so strong that she no longer got the E. coli infections. It's that effective, John. If you're a little E. coli bacteria and you want to hang on to D-mannose and you crawl up in the bladder, that's what you do. But what happens if somebody takes some D-mannose? Most of it isn't absorbed into our bodies if we take a teaspoon or so, or the scoop that's now in the containers of D-mannose. Instead, most of it's excreted in the urine. So let's imagine I'm a bacteria hanging onto the cell wall here. I'm hanging onto the D-mannose because otherwise I'll be swept out. And here comes a whole flood of D-mannose down the ureters. Oh my goodness, it's party time. There's lots of D-mannose to hang on to. I don't have to hang on to the wall of the bladder anymore. So I just joined the party, and the next time she urinates, out I go with, and I'm saying she because women get most of the bladder infections just by anatomical design, I guess. It clears up E. coli infections every time, and guess what? We didn't create a resistant bacteria because the E. coli like the D-mannose. And I'm imagining the little E. coli going down to the sewer treatment system and telling all the other bacteria how well it was treated. She's given a big party with D-mannose. So is that bacteria going to become resistant? Of course not. Well, that was the first case I know of We then had other women try it. It worked on all the E. coli infections. So I called up one of those companies and said, can you put this stuff in jars? And no. You can't patent it, so I'm not making any money on that. There are a number of companies now selling D-mannose in all the health food stores. And ladies, if you go on a trip, take some with you if you're prone to bladder infections. If it does not work to reduce symptoms within the first 24 hours or so, though, you may be in the 10% where it's some other kind of bacterial infection, and for that, the D-mannose won't work. So there we go, John. That's a simple one. You can do it yourself, but you can't make big bucks on it. So do you ever see it on TV? Well, no, but you also won't see commercials that'll kill you because it won't. Can't possibly. You'd have to swallow probably a couple of quarts of D-mannose to even hurt yourself.
I'll tell you. Yeah, this whole money issue is actually quite disturbing. But I suppose once the awareness is out there, then that problem will take care of itself. You know, it's like I like to say, if you want something to go away, quit buying it, and it will.
Yep. Sooner
or later. All right, what else you have for us?
Okay, is there one on that list you'd like me to pick on?
What's that?
Is there one on the list you'd like me to pick on?
Well, yeah, I'm wondering about this ultraviolet blood irradiation from the 1920s.
No kidding. From the 1920s. Now, someone in the late 1800s and early 1900s noticed that people with tuberculosis did a lot better if they were in the sunshine. Okay, sunshine. Yeah. Was it the vitamin D? Well, that didn't become clear till later. Now, there was an engineer right here in the Seattle area who reasoned that if you who reasoned from reading papers where people had taken ultraviolet and shined it on germs, and the germs died. And we all know that we can buy, if we want to, in a catalog now, a little UV wand that we can take if we go in a hotel and we're suspicious of the sheets, and we can pass the UV back and forth. What we don't all know is that British hospitals started UV irradiation of every sheet, every blanket, everything. And guess what? The hospital infection rate went way down after that because the ultraviolet had killed the germs. And I wish American hospitals were all doing that, but we haven't caught up with it yet. All right. Well, anyway, this particular Seattle engineer, his name was Knott, Knott. He reasoned that if ultraviolet on the outside, let's say on the skin, oh, by the way, folks, if you've got a stubborn fungal infection, either take a vacation to Cancun and lie in the sun, or go to a tanning bed. But unfortunately, you got an infection on your skin, they probably won't let you in. So you might have to buy an ultraviolet tanning bed, but it'll get rid of the skin infection, no problem. It kills funguses, it kills viruses, it kills bacteria. Back to Mr. Knott. He reasoned that if we put ultraviolet into the blood, that the radiation might persist and kill germs. So he tried it. And it worked, John. What's done is to take the blood from the vein, put it through quartz. Quartz lets UV through, glass does not. Into a syringe. And then when you got 100 cc's of blood in the syringe, you pump it right back in the person. And it goes through the quartz and the UV irradiation, it goes back in the person. Now, this was done extensively in the 30s and 1940s. And I should say something very important. There's a doctor from Shadyside Hospital, somewhere in Pennsylvania, who reported treating 4,000 people for their infections with ultraviolet blood irradiation, and none of them, and that is none, had any adverse effects. Yes. And there's another doctor, Dr. George Miley, who is also famous for doing this. He treated people who were both, and remember this is before antibiotics, were both infected seriously, and people who were said to be moribund. That means you're almost dead.
Yeah.
The seriously infected people, it was something like 16 out of 17. I don't have my facts right in front of me to quote from, but something like 16 out of 17 with serious infections were cured. And that includes people with childbirth fever, women with childbirth fever, of course. And women would die of childbirth fever. Just take a look at the headstones in a cemetery from the 18th century and the 19th century. A lot of ladies died in childbirth. After Dr. Miley got going in his hospital, nobody died in childbirth. The moribund people who were practically dead, Miley reported that half of them were brought back from practically dead by repeated ultraviolet blood irradiation. Out here, there's a publication from one of the local hospitals, Virginia Mesa Hospital, about the use of ultraviolet blood irradiation. It kills germs, John. If you catch an infection early enough, you can get rid of nearly any infection. Yes, you have to go to the doctor. They have to take the blood, they have to put it through the quartz cuvettes, they're called, and put it back into your body. But it kills germs. So whatever happened to this? Well, as the Harvard publication said, the cure the time forgot. And as they pointed out, what happened to it was antibiotics. Now, antibiotics were patented.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
It's the money again.
Money on this. And number two, they're more convenient. I got to admit, it's more convenient to take some pills and get rid of your infection than it is to go have your blood irradiated ultravioletly. However, antibiotics also lead to many, many bad effects. UVBI, if you remember, led to none in 4,000 people. Most of those have to do with disrupting the normal bacteria in our body. I can't tell you how many people have yeast infections because they were given antibiotics when they were kids, and they got yeast growing in their guts. I don't mean vaginal yeast infection here, I mean in the gut. And yeast can set off autoimmune disease because yeast happens to be totally resistant to any antibiotic there is. But what's being noticed now is that more and more and more bacterial strains don't like being killed. It's not like D-mannose and E. coli, where E. coli love the D-mannose. They get killed. They don't want to get killed. And they're living critters. So they develop resistance. And they share that resistance with other bacteria. And we're being told that, oh, we're going to get to the point where the antibiotics don't work anymore, which is probably why the Harvard researchers decided to revive the cure that time forgot, ultraviolet blood irradiation. Now, we happen to have been doing it quietly, and we haven't made any noise about it here at Tahoma Clinic. That way we didn't get rated for ultraviolet blood radiation machine. But when the Harvard researchers came out with it, okay, now Harvard has done it. So we've been more public about it, John, since, and I made sure to put it in the Green Medicine newsletter.
Germ. Fights germs. Kills germs. Is, so viruses and bacteria and some other things.
Fungi. Ultraviolet gets them all.
Prions or whatever those things are.
Don't forget those. I'm sorry, no knowledge.
Gotcha. Well, I wonder if this ultraviolet technique has been used to maybe treat HIV.
Don't know, but it's a very good idea.
I don't know why they wouldn't. If it's a virus, if it's alive, it can be killed, right?
That's what UV does.
Okay.
If it's a microorganism. So, you mind, John, if I put in that I also have a radio program? Is that okay?
I want you to tell us all about your radio program and anything else that would be beneficial by going to your site. Okay.
It's called Green Medicine Radio. How do you like that? And it has an online archive. And by the way, thank you so much for archiving Caravan to Midnight. I think I mentioned I've listened to a whole bunch of your shows when I'm otherwise working at a desk. So thank you for that. But that's been archived. It has on it a search engine where you can put in any type of thing you're interested in, diabetes 2, fibromyalgia, whatever you'd like. Show's been going on since 2010. The search engine will bring up the segment of each show where that topic has been discussed. You can listen to just the segment. You do not have to listen to the whole program. It's also optimized for iPhone and Android and all the latest stuff there. It's called greenmedicineonline.com, greenmedicineonline.com. It's the archive for Green Medicine Radio, which is on Pacific time, Saturdays from noon to 2 Pacific time, every week when I'm in town, which is most of them, and we have guest hosts from Tahoma Clinic. When I'm not in town, I'm off at a conference, either teaching or learning, one or the other. So thank you, John. It's called Green Medicine, the newsletter. The radio program is Green Medicine, called Green Medicine also. The radio program has its archive. And by the way, if you subscribe to Green Medicine newsletter, it has its archive too. If you pay for 1 year's subscription, you can read all the past newsletters. And enough advertising. Let's get back to something you're interested in, sir.
I'll tell you what, I think I maybe said this back in 2015 when we first met, and that is that rule number 1 of the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm, right? So
it was, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking that you're following that. I take it there's been no blowback health-wise from anybody who's gone through this bioidentical replacement therapy or any of the other ones.
Not that we're aware of, John, and it's been going on since 1982.
Well, I'd say that's a pretty good track record. Gee, I miss the 80s almost every day. They went by way too fast. They really did.
But remember, with the bioidentical hormones, there are known ways to keep it safe and keep it within limits of what belongs in the body, when it belongs in the body, where it belongs in the body, all those things.
Would you mind just telling me one more time? Did you say 130 cc's twice a week of B1 thiamine for early onset Parkinson's? Was that 130 cc's?
No, it was 100 milligrams.
100 milligrams, 130 cc's. It'd be almost like a, never mind.
A whole lot.
Yeah, a whole lot.
The thing is, they found it worked by injection. And their explanation for that is that the B1 transport in the brain fails in Parkinson's disease, so they have to inject it in a big dose all at once. Now, thiamine or vitamin B1 is really in lower doses quite safe, and a low dose is anything below 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day. So they only used 100. We've been trying with 200. It's a good idea to back up any 1B complex vitamin with the rest of them, but they were very, very emphatic about saying it had to be injected to get the results.
Okay, so 130 milligrams, yeah?
Oh, 100 milligrams.
100 milligrams. Why do I keep wanting to say 130? Maybe it's because it's the magic 13 with a 0 on the right side of it. I don't know. It's a pleasure, as always, to speak with you. But let's make sure that it's not a year before we talk again, because I have a feeling that there are some other areas we could get into, and we'll certainly allot however much time you need.
Well, sir, I'd be happy to do that. We haven't covered all our topics today. There's bunches more to talk about. Thank you so much for letting me get the word out about safe, effective, well-researched, natural things, John, that we can all do.
Very good, sir. We'll make it a point to put your segment up on our YouTube channel so that the world can have access to it. And then, if you want to, I'll have K2 send you an email that just have your webmaster put a link on there, and it'll take it right to it.
Hooray! Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. God bless.
You too, John.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye now.
Dr. Jonathan Wright, everybody. Wow. See, there are people out there that are doing the real work. And, golly, isn't it just boring when it comes back to money every time? It's boring, but it is an immutable law. As stated in Scripture, the love of money is the root of all evil. Next. Oh, that didn't work out. Pay me, right? You got to make sure and pay me. I mean, after you have a few $1 million, how much more do you really need? It's not a question of how much more I need. It's what I want. Oh, gotcha. It's that love of money thing again. All right. Well, as I like to say, exercise caution in your daily affairs. And as my dad said to me one time, quoting another really old man, you got to watch out for them pill pushers. Keep your eyes up always. Make ready for what's to come. God bless. See you tomorrow.